Hey everyone, welcome back to The Crown Season 4 episode by episode recap. We are the Good Doctors. I am Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And we are not Maggie Thatcher apologists here, I will tell you that right now. But what we are is people who know Northern Ireland in particular really well. We both hold PhDs in studies of various historical parts of the country. We lived in Northern Ireland for 5 years, and this means we have a somewhat interesting relationship with UK government history, more so than some other Americans, perhaps. And we bring that to all of our recaps and all of our analyses. We have promised that we will not detour into a Northern Irish rant every single episode. And even though this one deserves it, we will hold our promise. And we'll be talking about the events in Northern Ireland of this episode at a later time in a separate video that you can skip should you choose to.
Correct.
But we are going to talk about the plot really quickly of this episode before we get into some things. So we kick off with Mark Thatcher, Maggie Thatcher's very obviously favorite child, is an idiot and on a rally he shouldn't be on, it sounds like, because he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he's lost somewhere in the Sahara Desert in North Africa for 5-6 days. That's the backbone of this episode. We see at several occasions that her advisors try to come in and talk to her about a brewing issue in the Falkland Islands off the coast of Argentina, and she does not want to prime minister at the time. She wants to mother, which is her right, but also in giant capital letters, I wrote, "This is the job, Mags."
I several times throughout the episode, I was like, yeah, but you're the prime minister.
You're the prime minister.
You're the one that has said women can't be leaders because they're too emotional, but that doesn't include you.
Because you're not a woman. I don't even understand. I just kept thinking about, this is why we have the 25th Amendment, so that a president can temporarily recuse themselves.
So that when you're
emotionally compromised, you're not the one in charge of making decisions. Feel free to take that, every other country. It's worked out pretty okay for us so far. So definitely fictionally, especially. Bartlett does it in West Wing, and it's a really good plot point.
It is a good plot point.
So that's brewing on in the background. And we find that Maggie meets with Lizzie, and Maggie's trying to talk about something, but is like breaking down because Mark's missing.
Yeah.
And Maggie just very calmly says, well, he's my favorite child. And Lizzie's like, parents don't have favorite children. And then she goes to talk to Philip, and Philip's like, we absolutely have favorite children. Mine's Anne.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, who's mine? And he goes, oh, you seriously don't know? Everybody knows who your favorite is. And immediately my brain went, oh, it's Andrew.
It's Andrew, yeah.
But we spend the rest of the episode with her while she figures it out.
Yeah.
Her episode arc in this episode is having an individual meal with each of her children, who are all various levels of either damaged or insufferable. And and then
spectrum of damaged and insufferable. We've got 4 different folks.
We have 4 different plot points. While also Maggie continues to very clearly like her son a lot better than her daughter, and wait for Mark's return. We get Mark's return at the end. He is a terrible person from this description.
From this
etc. This journey. And really it's a meditation on motherhood and leadership in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
That I, not as a mother, but as somebody who loves a lot of mothers who are in leadership, don't recognize any of my friends in, which is really fascinating. When we take a step back, we are really interested in leadership and in gender around here, which is why we're talking about the show in the first place, because ostensibly it was going to be about the most powerful woman on the planet. If not culturally, then if not governmentally, then culturally. So I really appreciated the time spent with Elizabeth in this, but I'm fresh from watching it. Dr. Erin's got a little bit more distance than I do.
I slept on it, so
I'm like half an hour after.
Buzzing.
And my at Maggie is so fresh.
Yeah, totally fair.
And also I really hate all of her kids except Anne. I hate all of her sons. I hate all of her sons.
They're just,
I hate them all. And so I'm a little about that, but the thoughts about motherhood, I do want to get into in a little bit after we talk. So we'll put a pin in that and return.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think we probably will. We've vacillated about whether we will do as many Northern Ireland special edition episodes, but I think we should talk about the hunger strikes. And so we'll probably do a separate video about them specifically. They take place not during this episode, but before this episode, they actually take place. The wedding happens in the middle of the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland. But it was certainly something fresh in my mind as we start 1982. And, as Dr. Kristen said at the beginning, we always see the lens of British history and British political history through Northern Ireland. That is just our lens from our experiences. And so, we can't turn that off. I can't look at Maggie Thatcher and not think of how she behaved with Northern Ireland. So there were parts of this episode that were really, really hard for me to take, even if this is a fictionalized version of Maggie Thatcher, particularly when she was talking about their need to go defend the Falklands because those are our people and we can't abandon them. I had to pause the episode and deal with my anger that she did not feel similarly about citizens of the United Kingdom that were not off the coast of Argentina, were in fact off the coast of Manchester. So it was, there were parts of it that were challenging. I knew nothing about the Falklands War. I have several friends and colleagues from Northern Ireland that are quite interested in it, but I knew nothing about it. So I literally Googled it after this episode to find out what happened. But from what I Googled, this was historically accurate to the timeline of the confrontation in the Falklands. But yeah, the whole, and I guess at the end we get this idea that, Thatcher realizes that she's always a mother first, and that, maybe she can't go around saying that she's not a woman and, she's above all of this leadership stuff. I don't know. I didn't care for the storyline. I didn't care for her as a human. I felt real bad for Carol Thatcher because it looks like she just got the terrible end of the stick. The family dinner was so awkward. And I felt really bad. I also Googled Carol Thatcher, and I think she's living her best life. She's a best-selling author, wrote 2 books about her parents. She's a journalist, and she lives in Switzerland with, by the look of the name, a Swiss or Italian ski instructor. And I was like, Carol, I hope you're happy. I hope you're living your best life in the ski slopes of Switzerland. And I'm delighted that that's what Wikipedia had to tell me about Carol Thatcher.
I want to say that the guy who's playing Mark Thatcher, the last time I saw him, he was playing a serial killer. And I don't feel like a lot of different acting choices were made. And I don't really know what that says about either the serial killer, Mark Thatcher, or the actor.
Or the actor.
I got very similar vibes from Freddie Fox.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So her whole conversation with Carol about strength and weakness in terms of gender was both infuriating and I think really typical of the way that we thought about leadership for a really long time.
Yeah.
And we're having stronger conversations now that encompass leadership in a much more holistic way, which is wonderful. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that there are quite a lot of people that's why they don't think that women can be leaders of countries or leaders of companies or even leaders of families, because this understanding of strength, which really what we're talking about is stoicism. We're not talking about strength.
Right.
We're talking about stoicism or emotional reactions.
Right.
And but like even my own father is of the boomer generation.
Right.
And he's changed a lot and thought a lot differently, but he really struggles to think about emotions as anything but weakness.
Right.
And to understand that everyone has emotions all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about whether you have emotions or not, it's about whether you allow yourself to experience them.
Yeah. And how you use them and don't use them in your leadership style, not necessarily whether they're there or not.
Correct. And so I think that's the fascinating thing about both Maggie and Lizzie. And again, this is a fictionalized version of both of them. But I believe Peter Morgan is at least vaguely sympathetic to Margaret Thatcher. In some ways, his public statements about politics would lead me to believe that he is at least moderately sympathetic towards her.
Yeah.
I still didn't love that most of the episode, even when we saw Lizzie, she was painted like a fool for not knowing her own children, which wasn't great. But that like she had to ask for a memo on her kids. Like, I don't know if she ever had to do that, but that felt like an unnecessary detail to throw in. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I thought, and it came too late in the episode, right? But as she's realizing, you know, that she doesn't really know her kids and that they've raised children that she doesn't necessarily like, because you definitely get that impression from her. She doesn't see her kids for who they are. She certainly doesn't see her kids for how being a member of this family has shaped them positively and very negatively in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think she is baffled at their privilege because she doesn't feel it.
Yeah.
And she doesn't real understand. Like, I was thinking about it, like, she was born a princess, we all know that, but she wasn't born into the crown.
Right.
And I don't think it ever occurred to her that, like, the number of times, like, the way her sons threw around their order to be in the throne, I think, like, she never thinks about that.
Yeah.
And was shocked that they do.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah, and I think too, this idea that like that they might be unhappy with it, as if they like, I think for her, like the way her coping mechanism for being monarch when she wasn't supposed to be monarch because she was the first daughter of the second son, was that, you know, this is my life. Like, I have to accept it. What's the point of being upset about it? Like,
it will pass. Everything I'm upset about will pass.
Yeah. So, and she expects her children to think that, but they're of a different generation and of a different time.
And they're also half genetically Phillips.
Yeah. And so it was interesting to me that they got all the way to the end of the episode, and then the conversation with Elizabeth and Philip where he says, like, yeah, but you're the mother of the nation. So like she couldn't be a mother to her children because she had to be the mother of the nation. And like we know that she famously gets on much better with Edward and Andrew than she does with Anne and Charles. So that I believe that to be a true part of this episode. And I wouldn't be surprised if she did push for those children because of that reason, that she wanted kind of a do-over in terms of that. But for me, it was hard that it took that long to get to that point. That's why she understood herself that way as a mother. But maybe it was certainly she had to learn that, I guess, through this episode. It struck me as odd that like the mother of 4 grown adults hadn't thought about that at all. And that's not necessarily the perception of Lizzie that I would like to have. Maybe when she had little kids, sure, she didn't have time. What is she doing now? She can think about. And so I agree with you. Like, I didn't like this version of her that like never thinks about her kids.
And maybe it's true. I mean, I don't think it is, because it just, again, what is she doing? But like, I mean, super famously, Andrew has been the subject of some public questioning and scrutiny recently. He was disinvited from one of his daughter's weddings. He has some very problematic friends.
He said some very problematic things.
He appears disconnected from reality in a lot of ways. And there are a lot of allegations against him that a quick Google search would be happy to explain to you. And I wondered how many people watching this episode knew that. Yeah. I also wonder how many people knew about Prince Edward. Because like, it's just one of those things where I was like, oh yeah, Netflix is American and they don't know she's got other kids. And so we're going to spend some time with Edward, who lives a very quiet, not super public life. And Andrew, who is in the public eye for a lot of complicated, terrible reasons.
Yeah. There were some references in the dialogue between Andrew and his mother
that are a little too close to home,
that were a little too on the nose, made me exceptionally uncomfortable. Particularly because we have to be careful what we say about HRH Prince Andrew, but it's very well documented that he had a long-standing friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And so any conversation about sex and age,
underage girls,
young nubile women, I'm not sure if it was intended to make the audience very uncomfortable, or to kind of tip the hat at what we now have allegedly stories involving Prince Andrew. But it was super hard to watch. It made me feel super uncomfortable. And I don't like I don't want them to not talk about it, but I was also really unhappy that they dealt with it at all, because it seemed cheap in that moment.
Or it's setting us up that this is who he is and this is who he's always been.
Yeah.
And
And
I think like he saw absolutely no trouble with that movie. Yeah. And that's a good shorthand to tell us that this is who the rumors about him and allegedly enjoying sexual relations with underage girls have been around for a long time. Yeah. And they have those allegations and those rumors are pretty synonymous with him. And unfortunately, therefore, have followed his daughters, who you may know, viewers, as two of the craziest hat wearers from Kate and William's wedding.
I know, Beatrice and Eugenie.
Who are both married in their own right now, and delightful Instagram follows, by the way.
You know, Eugenie moved into Harry and Meghan's cottage.
Yes.
I just learned that the other day.
Yes. It was there was an Instagram announcement. That's just how I know this.
Yeah, I know this because John Mulaney was on Seth Meyers, and he told me about it. But yeah, they're delightful. They're from Sarah Ferguson, right?
Yes.
Was Andrew's wife and the
which
mother.
We'll find out. The former Duchess of York enters into this narrative. I certainly hope she does, because I find her fascinating.
Yeah, she's a fascinating character for sure.
But all of this to say, it's either the total shorthand and it's supposed to make you uncomfortable because this is just who he is.
Yeah.
And this might be in the timeline the only time we ever deal with it. I don't know if we don't talk about Andrew and Fergie's divorce, because a lot of the allegations of why they got divorced had to do with his proclivities. And especially in the British media. I mean, they were terrible to her too, because she didn't look the part of a duchess.
Right.
But the scuttlebutt was not kind to either one of them during that divorce process. Yeah. So I don't know where we're really ending up or what's going to happen with that. So this may be the only time we ever see Andrew.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought. And I was like, oh, okay, we're just throwing everything we could think we can about Andrew into this conversation.
Yeah. And like, I don't know anything about Edward. Maybe he is kind of he was bullied and is very kind of vindictive because of it.
I know zero things about Edward.
I don't know anything about Edward. I couldn't tell you who he's married to or who his kids are.
But we will look it up, y'all. Rest assured.
Don't worry. So it's very interesting. My final thoughts about motherhood and leadership.
Yes.
Like we've said, we were both raised by very strong women, who saw leadership and motherhood in slightly different ways, but still raised us to be exceptionally strong, and also to access our emotions, and to use them and to embrace them and to understand what being a woman in this world meant and what it could mean and how to access all of that. And I've got friends who are CEOs of huge companies who are also mothers, and they would hear Margaret's explanation to Carol of what motherhood is as abhorrent. Yeah. And have a really hard time with it. But I think when I read biographies of women of that generation, that seem to be exceptionally popular. And I often wonder the disservice we did to mothers and daughters of those generations by telling women that to be in power, they had to behave like stoic men.
Yeah.
And that is, as we have evidenced by a lot of things in the last 20 years and watching women enter into positions of power, we kind of screwed the pooch on that one.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I think that's such an important point to make. And like, as much as I disagreed with both Elizabeth and Maggie Thatcher's portrayals of leadership and motherhood in that relationship, especially what Margaret Thatcher said. I 100% understood it as well, as like she was a product of her environment.
Yep.
Growing up trying to be a woman and a leader in that part of the world, in that part of history. And we did a huge disservice to women and girls by and to men really, and boys, and saying that emotions weren't a part of leadership or that they were a weakness, because we have a whole hell of a lot of toxic masculinity batting itself around these days because we have enculturated men not to deal with emotions.
Yeah.
So it was the parts of this episode I really enjoyed. We got to see some top-notch Olivia Colman snark, which should always be happening.
Oh my God, that meal between her and Charles is like...
Which I was just like, that must have been so much fun, because in my head, canon, I am personal friends with Olivia Colman. And I just think it would be delightful. And I'm sure they had a lot of fun being, because that's not at all who Josh O'Connor is. Obviously, he's not Prince Charles in real life. But yeah, for me, there were parts of this episode where I was like, thank you. Thank you for the gift of her like knocking down Charles's nonsense about straight lines being conventional. And yeah, we'll see what the next episode is. I'm assuming we're gonna get more of Diana. She's pregnant with William clearly in this episode. And Charles is being an absolute monster. So only sunshine and roses to come.
Yeah, everything's gonna be fine. From here to 1997, nothing but smooth sailing.
And on that increasing note of sarcasm, I think that's exhausted our comments on favorites. I don't think my mother or father have favorite children. But
no, ours go out of their way to show that they don't. So
to show that they don't, which is an excellent thing. Because
although there were definitely times I thought my dad loved our most recent dog more than he loved me, I can't lie.
Rafiki was an amazing dog.
He was an amazing dog. I did never blamed him for it, like ever. I wasn't ever upset about it.
Well, my mother definitely loves our cat more than she loves either myself or my brother.
Yeah, like we just need to call a spade here.
Totally honest, she is enamored with that cat.
If we are introducing fur children into the ranking, I rank far below all fur children.
True story.
True story.
Okay, kids. We'll see you next week for episode 5.
Bye, guys.
Bye.